And so the sketch would develop. You know, that's a noble tradition. But instead we were getting very angry, earnest people, quite rightly, railing at the world, and we weren't really in no position to do that, living in panelled rooms with servants making our beds every day. So, yeah, quite. But anyway, we were standing on stage like this, and we'd finished the show one evening, and we were bowing, and there was this kind of kerfuffle. It was really odd, kerfuffle. And I turned and I said, what the hell? And walking on stage was a man who had just become very famous because of a television series called Not the 9 O'Clock News. It was Rowan Atkinson, who was walking on stage. And the audience obviously all recognised him, and he went, can I, and we were thinking, this Rowan Atkinson, he's always been a bit weird. I mean, brilliant, but weird. He's actually gone mad. But he said, I would like very much to make the happy announcement that we have won the Perry Award. Then he did a bit of Mr. Bean's kind of... and obviously the audience laughed more than they had at us throughout the entire evening. But that was okay, because then on came the award-giving party and they gave us his award. And one of the things that happened, I think, as a result of that was that we were asked to perform the show on British television, and we got a contract, and, you know, we started a comic career, if you can call it that. But the most exciting for our purposes here is that a man called Michael Edgley asked if we would be asked if we would be interested in touring Australia. And a month or so later, we arrived in Sydney and then immediately went to Perth and did a tour. It was 1981. Some of you elderly gentlemen may remember. More gentlemen I use distinctly rather than ladies, although I'm sure many ladies will too, was the year that Ian Botham single-handedly wrested the ashes from your nerveless fingers. And so our show was called Botham the Musical, just as a way of dropping a few lemon splashes onto the paper cut. And you've had your revenge a few times since, obviously. But I think, who has the ashes now? Let me just remember. Oh, yeah. It's the same people who beat you in the World 2020 final, wasn't it? Oh, and the last ODI. And a rugby match. Anyway, no, great. It's how often can an Englishman stand on the stage and say any of those things? Let's be honest. Might as well enjoy it. So that's when I came to Australia, and Australia taught me a number of things. Most importantly, how to eat and drink. It was an incredibly exciting place to visit from a rather shabby, unhappy England. In 1981, Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister. It was before the Falklands War and before yuppies and the explosion of a kind of, you know, credit boom and a new confidence. It was still a pretty grotesque place, England, to eat and to live. It was pretty grey, although I'd lived a privileged life in some ways. We all knew that Australia was like, it's as if someone had pressed the colour button, and there was a lively and extraordinary, vibrant country where you sold wine varietally, which we'd never done in England. So I learnt about grapes. You could buy a Penfolds Grange for under $100. Can you imagine? And $100 was only about £2 in those days. And despite the peculiarity that you had to take the bottle to almost every bloody restaurant, there was also oysters and crayfish, oysters Kilpatrick and oysters Rockefeller and oysters Casino. And I mean, it was just unbelievable, the food. I'd never had anything so plentiful and fresh and cheap and exciting, and the attitude absolutely overwhelmed me. It was a really remarkable experience. So I have forever since then been unbelievably grateful to Australia for opening my eyes to the pleasures of the table, but also for opening my eyes to a whole new continent with which I am deeply fond, of which I am deeply fond. And so it is really a strange journey from Wodehouse and Waugh and Wilde and schools and writing and Cambridge to this great city. Thank you so much, Sydney. Thank you very much indeed. You're very kind. Thank you. Thank you, Esther. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Oh, you're so wonderful. Thank you. Now, I'm going to go off. Thank you. Oh, bless you. Thank you so much. Thank you. You are lovely. You are unbelievably kind. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm going to go off now. Some rather attractive young men are going to do a little bit of stage building, which will take about 30 or 40 seconds, and then I will come on with Jennifer, and we will have something of a Q&A. See you in a bit. Hello. Goodness. Well,
I think we'd all agree, actually, isn't it? W, as it turns out, stands also for wonderful.
oh,
Would you like to thank him again? Look, let's begin by... No, I want to pick up actually on some of the things that you left, the gaps in the story.
Yeah.
The gaps in the story. I mean, as you say in your autobiography, the first autobiography, that you could read well at 3, and that you were writing accurately at 4. You've already told us that by 11 you were in love with the words of Oscar Wilde, yet we almost didn't hear your voice. I think you should tell us about how the world actually was given you by your voice coach, without whom no one would have understood anything.
Well, I gabbled. I spoke incredibly quickly. I mean, so quickly, and I was completely puzzled. Do you know there's a Star Trek episode where there's a... It's very important. Most of human history and art can be expressed in Star Trek plots. And it's true. Just to go with a slight side thing, I actually did the finals of my Cambridge degree was on the subject of Nietzsche and tragedy, and I mostly wrote about Star Trek, and I have to say I got a very good degree. It's partly because, just in case you wanted to write an essay about Nietzsche and Star Trek, was that Nietzsche argued that all tragedy was based on an opposition between the Apollonian and the Dionysiac instincts in ancient Greece, and particularly Greek tragedy. In other words, the Dionysiac instinct for wine and revel and feasting, the id, as you might say, the animal part of us. And against that was the Apollonian, the harmonic, logic, reason, rhetoric. And that the Greek civilization was playing out in front of itself the story of its own beginnings, from blood feuds and trials and tribal wars and appetite and sexual lust and animal instincts, and this extraordinary thing of logic and reason that it had founded through Aristotle and the philosophers, and music and Pythagoras and everything else. And the two were constantly at war, as they are in all of us, of course, which is why tragedy is so fantastic a medium. And oddly enough, that's what most Star Trek stories are about. That you have the captain in the middle who is trying to balance both his humanity and his reason. And on his left shoulder in the original Star Trek, you have the appetitive, physical Dr. McCoy. Everything's, you know. And on his right shoulder, you have Spock, who is all reason. And they're both flawed because they don't balance the two. And they're at war with each other. Bones is always having a go at Spock. And Kirk is in the middle, representing the perfect solution. And not only that, the planets they visit usually make the mistake of being either over-ordered and over-reasonable and over-logical, so they kill those who would dissent, and they do it calmly and reasonably, and they have to learn to be a bit human. You will learn to be human. And or they are just a savage race that needs reason and order. So it's that quest of the universe. Anyway, that's why Star Trek is incredibly important, of course.
And the connection with
there is a Star Trek plot where there is a race who live at incredible speed. And they live so fast you can't see them. And there's just a noise. And through some use of, it's pre-tachyon beams, but through some particular technology, they manage to go onto their sphere, and so you see all the rest, everyone's like this, and the new beings are like that. Anyway, I was like that. I was super fast. I was unbelievably hyper. I spoke so quickly, I had to have elocution lessons because nobody could understand a word I said.
What did you sound like?
I was sound like, because I wanted to talk like that.